The MTA, one of this community's favorite all-time topics. As everybody knows, I ride the 7 train all the time, and I know that it has been the source of incredible frustration for so many people in this community. Many of you, like me, are fed up with the MTA, the structure of the MTA, and the unaccountability, the lack of accountability of the MTA. I am also a huge supporter of municipal control of the MTA, because part of my problem as a council member is that the MTA is, of course, a state authority. The governor appoints the leadership of the MTA. The governor really controls the MTA. And when we, the city of New York, have unacceptable delays, unacceptable situations like we do with the 7 and other trains and bus lines, who are they accountable to? How can we put the pressure on them to actually respond in meaningful ways? I will say that Andy Byford is probably the best person that we've seen in my time. I want to thank Access Queens, and obviously Melissa's been active on this issue for a long time. What we have done, obviously, is use the bully pulpit of the office to raise awareness and put pressure on the MTA. It works. It has worked. With all of the debris falling down all over Roosevelt Avenue, 61st Street, 52nd Street, 63rd Street, they wouldn't have done anything if we didn't go out there and point out every single time something nearly killed someone. And at first, the MTA said, there's no problem here, nothing to see, everyone keep going. And then something else would fall, and something else would fall, and something else would fall. And then finally, Andy Byford changed his mind and agreed to put up some protective netting. It is only up in a few blocks. The problem is much more systemic, but we have to make sure that we're doing all we can to make the MTA accountable to the people who actually live in these communities, who pay the fare, and who deserve much, much better service. So I'm proud of the work that we've done, and will continue to do to make sure that the MTA is held accountable. But I will say this, if we had municipal control, if we took it away from the governor and the mayor, whoever the mayor happens to be in the city of New York, had control to appoint the president of the MTA, just like they do the school's chancellor, I believe you would have more accountability because the mayor of the city of New York would then listen, I believe, much more to the concerns of strap hangers and those who ride the buses in the city of New York. I wonder how many people here feel that 7 train service has gotten better since they installed the communications-based train control. Any of you? A couple of folks, right? But that took 10 years, billions of dollars for what I think, at least in this room, appears to be moderate improvements in service. We've got to do better. We've got to make sure they're accountable. Right now, the MTA, the board structure, how it works, who appoints, is deeply problematic and doesn't work for us in the city of New York. Put the city in control, I think you'd have better results.
Okay, the MTA is pretty much the bane of all of our existences up here, I think, and we've been dealing with them for a while. Fundamentally, they have 2 big problems. They don't have the resources they need to invest to make it a world-class system or keep it one. And then when they have money, they don't spend it wisely. And so there's 2 prongs, because we can't just keep throwing money at them without making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing with the money. For example, I represent Sunnyside, Woodside, Long Island City, but also Astoria. And in Astoria, we went through the period that's actually still ongoing. They're in the last few months of it, where they would shut down the station entirely for 6 to 8 months. And we would say to them, great, you're shutting down the station. Are you doing anything to improve accessibility or service? You're closing down the station. We put a damn elevator in the station, which we've been begging them to do for years and years. And of course, they wouldn't do it. It was mostly cosmetic improvements. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars on it. And it was a total waste of money that the MTA doesn't even really have. The good news is we made so much noise about it they were planning on doing this in a lot of places in the city, and they terminated that program halfway through. So we saved a lot of other people the same dilemmas that we had on the Astoria line, the NNW. But nonetheless, we have stations that look really pretty, so you can enjoy your time waiting for the trains that never come when you're standing on the subway, which is just how they were thinking. We did manage to get Astoria Boulevard, which is the last one that's closed now, is getting elevators, thankfully. And so that should be happening in the next few months. And then in the capital plan that was just approved, Broadway, both the Broadway on the NW line and the Steinway Street Broadway stop is also slated to get some elevators, but we need to do more and in more places. We have the worst accessibility of any major mass transit system in the country. Only 23% or so of our stations are accessible, and that's not just for people in wheelchairs. These are new parents with strollers, or senior citizens, or people just carrying things to and from a shopping trip. I mean, this is just abysmal that we have such a low rate, by far the worst in the country, in terms of the accessibility of our stations, and then the service. We all know the problems with that. Jimmy mentioned the 7 line. Part of the problem is we have a dramatic infrastructure problem in Western Queens because the population is surging so quickly. We can't keep up. So when they started that signal line changing thing a decade ago, it was probably a good idea and would have improved things a lot more if it was in place a decade ago. But by the time they got it done, the population's already exceeded and the demand has already exceeded the benefit that is being provided from that change. So we have a lot of work to do. We did some good work in Albany again this year as part of the budget. We got $15 billion new, but also insisted on an independent audit of how they spend the money so we can try and tighten the reins on how the MTA does what it does. And I do agree with what Jimmy said about Andy Byford. And the team there now is a team that most people have confidence in, that they're trying to do the right thing. Hopefully they'll be allowed to do their work and get the job done.
Thank you. Obviously, concur with some of the things that were said. Just quickly on a couple of things that I've been more directly involved with. First of all, early in my career, we passed a bill to allow the public to speak at MTA meetings. That still exists, and again, I would continue to urge people who want to be activists to follow the meetings, put your 2 cents in, make sure the board members hear what you have to say. It's worked very well, and for many years, we were the only system in the country that didn't do that. The same thing with some of these capital projects. Again, many years ago, we were able to get funding for the viaduct, but it did not resolve the problems past 46th Street into the 50s, where the biggest problem with the collapsed material has been, in part because they were doing a major job there. It's definitely a big focus of all of us in the legislature. We voted for congestion pricing in this last legislative session, and I can tell you that many, many people in our community have written me very angry letters saying that they did not support congestion pricing because they feel it limits their ability to get into Manhattan. And for a long time, I was very, very torn, because I do think that's a concern, and certainly in London and other cities it has become an issue. But in the end, we have a lot of people here that are very transit-oriented, and I felt it would provide sustainable funding to the MTA. But it was frustrating to have them say they want another $50 billion or whatever it is, even though the thing isn't even up and running yet. So it has to be observed, it has to be focused, it has to be something that spends a lot of our time. For a while in my career earlier, before I worked on education and labor issues, I was the Assembly's representative to the Capitol Review Board. One of the things that happened after 9/11, many projects like the Signal Project were pushed aside. We were involved with a $600 million project to harden the 7 train tunnel because the city realized that they had to relook at every subway tunnel in the state, really, in the city rather, and then other projects in the rest of the state in the downstate region. So, it's constantly evolving. The capital plan constantly evolves. I don't do that anymore right now. We have a different member on it, but Speaker Hasty is very involved with it, and they share information with us. So it's not something that gets fixed overnight. It's an ongoing process. Unfortunately, for a long time, I felt the last 2 capital plans were not representative of the community's needs and were really about borrowing, short-term borrowing. That's a complicated topic for maybe a longer meeting at another time. But I would continue to ask people to get back to us. Bus lanes are another controversy. You know, people want them because they want bus accessibility, and then when they go in, everybody hates them. So it's a big issue, right? We get a lot of feedback from small business against it, but we're trying to see if we can, you know, come up with compromises, maybe limit the hours, etc. One of the reasons we don't have the accessibility we should is we have Access-a-Ride in a bus system. But I agree with Senator Gianaris. We've worked very hard to try to get more accessible stations, and it's very frustrating. For me personally, many of you know I have an artificial hip, I had a birth defect, the stairs are not always easy for me, and I think about someone who really has a mobility issue. You know, I can do it, I just sometimes am sort of grumpy about it, you know, but you know, but you know, somebody who really can't do it. And again, we've had forums on Access-a-Ride and other things. We have a lot of complaints about Access-a-Ride. I don't know if anybody here has ever used it, but my office, we get a lot of complaints about that. So how do we fix that as part of the accessibility piece? But it's an ongoing topic, an ongoing process. Sunnyside is so dependent on the 7 train. It's such an important line. I can only tell you that millions have been spent to harden the tunnel, to do things that have made the ride safer, but then some of the other projects got shunted and finally are happening. So, you know, just keep the feedback coming and we can continue to keep the pressure on. We have to go to more buses that are less polluting. There's a big effort now. I know, do you still drive an electric car? Mike drove an electric. Didn't you drive an electric car for a while, hybrid? I mean, we're all trying to come up with new ways to drive. I thought you did. You know, I mean, the trip to Albany is tough enough. We haven't been able to come up with a car that gets us there by battery. But, you know, I would just say to people, keep talking to us so we know what the issues are. We're out there, obviously. We feel, we see it, we drive it, we use it, we take the system. We're on the subways. You know, keep talking to us so we know what to focus on. All right, thank you.